KSQD thanks Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Center for supporting this program. Working from home? Why not escape from the cats, the kids, and the kitchen table? There's a nice clean desk, an ergonomic chair, and a cup of coffee waiting for you at the Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Center, 325 SoCal Avenue, Santa Cruz, satellitecoworking.com. The Satellite, your office away from home. Thank you, Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Center, for supporting KSQD 90.7 Community Radio for the Central Coast.
The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello, this is Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington, and tonight we are going to spend some time acquainting ourselves with one of the best kept secrets in town. The Community Foundation, Santa Cruz County, is a powerful force for good that has been supporting our region for decades. As this country reels with social disruption and systems failures, it can be refreshing to hear reports of what's working well in our region. The Community Foundation is one of those behind-the-scenes initiatives that sets about to get things done by creating community resilience through connection, compassion, and strategic brilliance. Our guest on the line here is Susan True, Community Foundation's CEO. Tonight, she is our guide, and she's going to lead us into a better understanding of an organization that is complex and sophisticated, and through that complexity is able to meet many needs in the rich and multifaceted region that we call home. Susan, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thank you, Christine. What a warm welcome. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for being on our show. You know, Talk of the Bay is really about all the stories going on specific to the Santa Cruz region. And I have to say, the Community Foundation is an impressive organization that has been having an incredibly powerful impact for quite some time. And yet at the same time, almost none of us know about it. What's going on there?
Well, the heroes of the Community Foundation are our donors who give locally because they're not only generous, but they know that our local solutions are going to come from local people. And the other heroes are our social sector leaders who see a problem and work every day to fix it, heal it, make it better. And so a lot of times the Community Foundation takes a little bit of a back seat because the heroes and our donors and our nonprofit leaders really shine.
Well, let's set this right. Community Foundation is going to get introduced tonight, and these foundations exist in every state in the union, and they're spreading around the world as well. How did our local Community Foundation begin?
Yeah, and you're right. Community Foundations number almost 900 in this country. So we're very fortunate that many communities have foundations dedicated to their well-being. Locally, ironically, we started in another time of crisis. The disaster of the 1982 floods poured 25 inches of rain onto Santa Cruz County, flooded Love Creek, caused deaths. The bridges over the San Lorenzo River fell. People were left without homes. They were left without jobs. And this community said, we can't wait for the feds. We can't wait for the state government to come and help us. We need to help each other, and we need to help each other now. And yet when those community members looked around, there wasn't a central place to collect resources and distribute resources for the benefit of the community. So the Community Foundation really was born from those 25 inches of rain that fell in such a short period and caused such devastation.
So you say collecting resources and dispersing resources, and that makes sense, but I want to dig a little deeper. I know the individuals that started the Community Foundation were really looking for a way to shepherd through kind of long-term developmental healing for our city. How do they work? How do community foundations work? It's, in preparing for this story, it was really eye-opening for me. It's a complicated and sophisticated organization that you have. And it makes me think of the power of ecosystems, that the more diverse and complex an ecosystem is, the more powerful and resilient it can be in its response. And the Community Foundation is a pretty sophisticated organization. Could you help us understand a little bit more what makes it able to create lasting developmental change in a community?
Well, first of all, I love that metaphor. Thank you for the ecosystem metaphor. We get to do two things, and we get to do it across a lot of issues. And I think that's what makes Community Foundations such a unique resource for regions. One thing that we get to do is make sure that the needs of today are met. We do grant making for today's needs, whether it's food insecurity or housing or making sure we have a vibrant art sector. We give for today, but we are always planning for the future. And so our other work, we do our today's work, really knowing this community well, being in close relationship with the people who are getting things done, accelerating solutions on our most pressing issues. That's part of our job. But the other part of our job is thinking about what happens next. What will this community need to sustain and to become a place where all people can thrive? What will we need? What will that look like? And to do that, we set up what we call our endowed funds. Those are funds that are meant to last literally forever. They're meant to meet the needs of the generations that come after us. So we work with people mostly through their wills and trusts, their beneficiary designations, and their life insurance to think about what their charitable intentions are for after they die. Maybe they didn't expect their real estate to appreciate as much as it has, and their little house, their little humble house, is going to really be worth something, and they'd like to leave part of it to something they love, maybe to a state park, maybe to an arts group, maybe to a cause, maybe to keep protecting the redwoods for generations to come. It can really be anything, and people's biggest dreams we can formulate into a charitable gift that will benefit this county for many, many, many years to come.
Well, foundations certainly are built for longevity. I was kind of amazed when I was looking into it to learn that they can be traced back very far back in history. They existed in our ancient civilizations in the Middle East and Greece and Rome. And for instance, Plato's Academy, which began in 387 BC, was established with an endowment that helped it sustain its existence for around 900 years. I was
That's amazing.
Blown away. Can you imagine any of our foundations existing that far into the future?
I can. I mean, we don't know what the needs will be, but we know there will be needs. And what's wonderful about a community foundation is we get to know donors so well, and we understand what their wishes are, and so we're able to steward those wishes well into the future. And so it's on the one hand, donors can set up a donor-advised fund here, which allows them to have a sort of, I think of it as a giving bank account. You might have a retirement account. You might have a checking account. You might have your mortgage account. But your donor-advised fund is your giving account. And that's a really flexible way to give now. It's probably the most flexible way to give now. But then we can also help people really, it's their deposit of their dreams. Sort of, what is it that I want to do after I'm not here anymore? What can this little slice of my house do for the Watsonville wetlands, for the redwoods, for children who have been abused, to make sure women are safe, to make sure kids get educated? All of those things we can help with.
Let's actually talk a little bit more about donor-advised funds. Am I hearing you correct that, like, say somebody had a home, an extra home that appreciated and had a lot of value, and they decided they were going to donate the value of that to the Community Foundation now? Does that mean they could say, for instance, I want this fund to go to social justice reparations and then actually talk to you about where it wants to go while they're still alive?
Absolutely. You can do that in a number of ways. The donor-advised fund could be one way that you could use in the example you gave, the sale of real estate to fund. But there's many ways that you could help set something like that up, a social justice fund to work towards racial justice, given the time we're in, reparations. And then we can set grant-making programs up around those wishes.
Wow, I have to tell you, I've never really thought of that before, and that's very empowering to think, because usually, you can look around and find organizations. Let's actually explore this. Why, say, would somebody prefer to do that rather than just search out the organizations that exist and give to them directly?
So, and you mean in terms of today's giving to help with today's issues in our community?
Well, certainly. Like, it's just, it seems to me like when I'm thinking of the donor-advised fund, it's like, well, let's set up a fund and say, let's just use me as an example. What would feel enlivening would be to say, I want to search out the people who are trying to create positive change who normally wouldn't be seen or acknowledged or given money. And would there be a way to do that?
Absolutely. So we help our donor advisors every day to find organizations that really meet their own mission and values, where we like the connectivity role that we play and the matchmaking role that we play, where we say, I understand you really care about that, but that's enlivening to you. I'd love for you to meet this organization, this person, this leader. And so we do a lot of the matchmaking part of our work is really fun. The reason why some people choose a donor-advised fund instead of giving to an organization directly is, one, they are looking for help and advice and guidance. Another is that it's so flexible. And so sometimes people have an inheritance. They sell their business. They have greatly appreciated securities. Something like that happens in their life, and they think, now's the time where I actually have funds to fuel a giving account. And so I want to start it now, and then I have the flexibility to use it, say, in a pandemic. I have the flexibility to use it across all sorts of different issues as long as, it's a nonprofit. And so we manage all that administration. Some people just simply don't like the paperwork of keeping track of every single charitable donation they make in a year. When you have a donor-advised fund, you only have to keep track of the gift to the community foundation, and we take care of all the other paperwork. So, between the ease and the flexibility, the knowledge and expertise, that donor-advised funds are often a preferred way to go.
Well, it sounds like a channel to exercise a lot of creativity and empowerment, a much more enlivening way to go about, possibly a more enlivening way to go about engaging with causes that really light a person up. But yes, I'm also hearing that your organization offers a tremendous amount of support in so many ways. And that's what I mean about it being a very complex and sophisticated organization that I think is very interesting, and I'm hoping our listeners are finding interesting, because everything you do from beginning through the whole arc to the end out to the giving requires an extraordinary amount of trust. People are going to give the foundation their funds, and I'm going to want to talk about, the funds that the foundation manages, because you have quite a lot of funds that you're sitting on that will hopefully carry into the long-term future. So there has to be a lot of trust about managing that money, and then knowing the community, knowing the causes and all these different little niches, and then offering that advice and trusting that everything's going to be managed perfectly. It's quite a juggling act, I imagine.
It's a pretty fun juggling act. We have really everyone who works with the Community Foundation is so grateful to get to do this. We work with just some of the finest humans around, and so we take very seriously our role in building trust with donors and with community leaders. And we do see it for the long term. We often say we've been planning for the future since 1982 when we formed, and we keep both those current needs and the long-term needs always in mind.
Well, I want to invite you to share a story with our listeners in a moment, but I want to reintroduce the show. For those who have just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD Santa Cruz at 90.7 FM. You might be live streaming at ksqd.org, and we are talking with Susan True, the CEO of Community Foundation Santa Cruz County, about all the ways that this incredible institution supports developmental change and transformation and really helping out our population and our region in good ways. And so, Susan, there's so many ins and outs to the story of Community Foundation, but I want to invite you to maybe tell a story that demonstrates that trust building. And I find it very heartening to hear these stories of building connection, building intimate connection within the community that creates positive change, because right now the news is so harrowing. We need these stories. There's this great quote that says that theories divide people and stories unite them. And stories are that intimate connective tissue. So do you have a story you might share about trust building?
Oh boy, so many stories. Let's see. One that comes to mind, people are very active in giving towards the end of the year, and I spend a lot of time with generous people in our community towards year end thinking about what they really want to do. And I met at the end of last year with a couple that have both just worked so hard their whole careers. They've been, both of them have been very involved in tech-related business, and they have worked over the hill, and they have commuted, and they've raised their families, and frankly, they are tired, and they haven't been able to pull their heads up and look around and see all of both the needs and all of the things that they might really care about, that they might find energizing and joyful to be a part of. And so they met with me at the end of last year, as I said, and they were stunned to learn how many people in our county go hungry and need the services of Second Harvest Food Bank. And they didn't know, as most people in our county don't know, that 55,000 people a month, and that's before the pandemic, use the food bank, between children in child care centers and mothers picking something up from their church food pantry to the homeless shelters, to, working parents just getting by. 55,000 of the 280,000 of us in the county use the food bank every month. And they were just really surprised by that, and they wanted to learn more. And we took a tour, and we talked with some people, and, they decided that was really important to them, that they care about a lot of things, but first and foremost, no one can be hungry. And just that learning was such a trust-building experience, because we really got to learn together about what they cared about. They didn't come in here saying, what I care about is hunger. But they arrived there and just learning more about community issues, and they were able to take a really active role, and they've even become volunteers now in some of the food distribution efforts during the pandemic. So that learning that they just started just a few months ago has become a big part of their whole family's life now.
The Second Harvest Food Bank is indeed one of the great stories in our county. I've had them twice since the pandemic started, and it's extraordinarily inspiring to understand the history and the accomplishment. And so I understand why that would call to your clients. And as you're talking about that reminds me of another story that I read about the foundation, which was sort of the flip side of Second Harvest Food Bank. People might know or might not know, but the National Guard has been stepping forward to be doing almost all the packing and distribution work that elderly volunteers had done for decades up until this point. And what we also know is there's a lot of undocumented immigrants in this area who are such a gift to our community. They do so much, and they're afraid to go to those distributions where they see what looks like military personnel. And your foundation, our Community Foundation, also helped assist there. Could you share that story with our listeners?
Oh boy, trust couldn't be more important right now. You know, so many people have been living in fear for years now because of deportation raids in our community, because of all the rhetoric around immigration, and yet, you know, immigrants all around us are working to fuel our economy and do so much work, from, you know, childcare to washing dishes to on and on and on, picking our food, and so much more. And what we realized when all of those jobs are so fragile in the kind of economic shutdown that we had in March, that began in March, that, you know, the housekeepers all lost their jobs, the dishwashers all lost their jobs, and they had never asked for help before. So families with children who had always worked 2-3 jobs to make it work here in Santa Cruz County suddenly had no income. They had paid unemployment payroll tax, and weren't able to get any unemployment or care stimulus. Were really, really fragile. But the fear that has been happening for years because of the immigration issues in our country stopped people from wanting to reach out. And I just have been so inspired by who stepped up to help, and it's been the most trusted people. So there's a wonderful performing arts group called Senderos, and Senderos has known children of mostly Oaxacan families in Santa Cruz County through performance art. They create music and dance together. They perform once a year at their festival at San Lorenzo Park. It's a wonderful, vibrant group. And when the pandemic hit and the shutdown happened, we realized that was the only group that some people trusted in our county. And so they immediately set up at the end of a street a drive-through to pick up grocery gift cards, just to be a lifeline and just to check on people, to make sure they were okay, to explain the pandemic, to talk about prevention of COVID, to understand what resources were available. And that has become and continues to be one of the most stabilizing lifelines of support in the county. And, another group set up a pop-up food distribution site so that immigrants didn't have to worry about ICE coming. It was just a pop-up. It spread through word of mouth only. And we're so honored to get to have community leaders that we trust, who we can support financially and in other ways, to make sure that our neighbors who have done so much for us and have so little right now can keep their families together.
Well, I find it's a real relief to hear that help is finding these individuals, and it is inspiring to hear, because you are a very top-notch professional organization, and I'm imagining it must be so satisfying to be weaving through so many different parts of the community and knowing that you can make those right connections. And really what you do, it's trust and it's connecting all kinds of dots all the time. You're like a pollinator. The community foundations like this. I'm seeing this image of, the bees going to all the different flowers, and there's just this sort of connecting line between all these different nodal points in the community.
It is truly a joy to get to do so. I mean, we just have so many stories of wonderful community members who have an idea and they need help to make it happen, and it gets done. I mean, that could be, just before the shutdown, the Shoreline Soccer Complex on 17th and Brommer opened. And that was a dream that Bill Simpkins had, to build a soccer field where children in Live Oak could have a place to come and play soccer. There wasn't a field. This is turf and it's lights. The kids will see their score on the board and think they've hit the bigs. It's an incredible project. And we got to help that come to fruition. When Gail Ortiz and Tony Campbell decided they were going to raise money to make the Capitola Library have a permanent home, and they knew that the Measure S funds would not be quite enough and we would need more, they came to the Community Foundation and said, how do we do this? And, if you drive by Clare Street and Wharf Road right now and take a look at the unbelievable design of the Capitola Library, you'll see how powerful it is when the community members get connected and are able to really accomplish great things. The Felton Library is another example of that. I call them merry bands of community warriors. They're just not going to give up. They're going to keep building their dream, and we get to help all of those things get done.
Oh, I just drove by the Felton Library a couple of days ago. I didn't even know about it. A friend of mine told me, and I drove over, and of course everything's dead. And I'm looking at this building, and I'm like, this is so beautiful. The parking lot, the little park, there's a little native plants park in the back.
That's right.
It's incredible. So you were part of the connective tissue of that coming into being.
We were, but boy, the people of San Lorenzo Valley worked on that for years, and that is just a wonderful story about perseverance and determination to have community spaces. And I think it opened in February or maybe late January. I can't quite remember, and I just remember saying, I just love public spaces, and of course, none of us are using them, so it's quite sad. But that was a dream that came to life that, we got to help with grant funds and with connecting donors and trying to get through red tape. And it's, that's, like I said, just a wonderful project.
So I'm getting this sense that, I know a lot of people who want to make really terrific things happen. They want to be a part of societal transformation. And a lot of people, when they want to start something, they'll think I have to start a nonprofit. But if somebody has funds and they have an idea, they can really come to you and get this incredible expert advice and knowledge base to help get that ball rolling without they themselves having to start a nonprofit. Is that correct? Am I understanding you right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, oftentimes there is a great organization that person might just not know about yet that's doing really similar work. Or oftentimes it's there's all sorts of ways that we can help, whether it's just making the connection or setting up a new way of giving. We can certainly do that. And sometimes, this is an intimate time of life, I think, for all of us. I think all of us are faced with thinking about our lifespan differently and the lifespan of our loved ones. And I know I myself am creating a trust with my partner right now. Just we better think about this. And, it's a good time to think about, to reflect on what is the legacy we want to leave. And that's not always about starting a nonprofit right now. One of my very favorite and heartbreaking stories is with a woman whose name was Nancy Lockwood. I'll just say her name because she was so loved, especially in the Watsonville community. She was a longtime public servant at the city of Watsonville. She helped to create the Watsonville Wetlands Trail System. And I met her just as she was diagnosed with a recurrence of brain cancer. And one of the things that she just didn't know how to handle is what to do about all the dreams she had for the Watsonville wetlands and, her life being cut short and her own ability to care for them. And so we sat with her in her home, and we worked out a plan, the Nancy Lockwood Fund, that could care for the Watsonville wetlands, could provide for environmental education for youth. This was not a wealthy woman. She worked for the city. But like some of us in the county, we've been able to buy real estate, and it's appreciated. And so she was really excited to think about all the things we could do. So we were able to set up that fund, and she asked us that at her memorial service, we would have on every chair a flyer about the fund so that her friends could give to it as well. And, that's just an incredible way that she will live on in the trails that she cared so deeply about.
It's quite a gift to hear all these services that you offer, not knowing they existed before, and imagining that moment, right, where you're having to make a lot of decisions. You're seeing perhaps your life coming to an end, and they can go to an organization that has so much knowledge and resources, things that really most of us don't even know exist, which is why we're doing this interview. That's just a really quite extraordinary. And so for listeners right now who might have just tuned in, I want to let you know that you are listening to KSQD Santa Cruz. This is KSQD 90.7 FM, or you might be live streaming at ksqd.org. And we are speaking with Susan True, the CEO of Community Foundation Santa Cruz County, an organization that's been around since 1982, working quietly behind the scenes to connect the dots in our community and help community members really pool their resources for the long-term benefit of this locale. And so you were talking about, the end of the year. It's tax season. A lot of people like to give at the end of the year. And one of the things that Community Foundation does is let's talk some numbers. It provides a way for people to donate, to get tax benefits. It provides a lot of financial advice related to charitable giving. Would you help people understand the financial part of your organization, how big you are, and how much you give away each year? I think it's pretty impressive.
Sure. We manage about $140 million in assets. We have literally hundreds and hundreds of funds. Some funds, like my donor advised fund, is named the True Wolf Fund because my last name is True and my partner's last name is Wolf, so it's the True Wolf Fund. We have donor advised funds named really fun things like the Emerging Jedi Fund, and some that are named, much more traditionally, the Johnson Family Charitable Trust, that kind of thing. So we have all sorts of ways of just naming funds and managing funds. But the big thing here is that we're looking for long-term sustained giving. And so we manage those, hundreds of millions, $100+ million of funds quite prudently. We are invested for the long term. We're not chasing short-term gains. We take a very measured approach because what we're trying to do is meet the needs of today, but we're also trying to meet the needs of future generations. So our investment performance has been quite strong. All of that's on our website. I invite people to look through it. So we manage those funds. And I think I'm forgetting your question, Christine. I started to ramble. I'm sorry.
Well, that was unfair of me. It was a bad question because there was too much in it. No, you're doing great. I wanted people to kind of understand just how many assets our community has collected and put into your hands, and then how much are you distributing each year?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we distribute, last year we were just about to $12 million in grants, in local grants to the community. In addition, we help donors who want to give, say, to their alma mater, or maybe they want to give to a national organization. We have some donors who care, for example, about climate change, and they might want to give to a national organization on climate change, but they also want to give locally to protect their environment. So just the local numbers are about $12 million last year, just under $12 million. That goes across the spectrum of our interests. That could be arts, the environment, human services, education, services for seniors or youth, all of it we can do, and we know those organizations really well. But they're tied together. These funds, I mentioned that they have different names. There's a fund I really like called the Molly Fund, and that fund was created by a mother in the early 90s, and she had her first child, and she had a large amount of resources, and she said, "This is really hard. I'm struggling to be a mom. This is tough. I didn't really know how tough this was going to be. How do people do it when they don't have as much help as I have?" And she started this fund so that we could make grants forever. It's what we call an endowed fund. So the money that she gave to us, she said, "Don't give it out all this year. Spend a little bit every year forever to help moms who have kids and need support." And so that's what we do with the Molly Fund. And that fund was started with about $85,000, and again, about 30 years ago. And it's grown because of our investment performance. And we have given over $100,000 in grants from that fund, and it still has about that much. So the power of endowment over decades is that it continues to build and allow us to make more and more grants. And at the same time, so we're taking care of the current needs, but at the same time, we're able to care for the moms, generations to come.
That is very impressive to know about. It would have never crossed my mind that somebody, $85,000 on the one hand is a lot of money for a lot of people.
It is.
On the other hand, when it comes to endowed funds, it's a modest amount of mm-hmm. money. And to know that you've been giving out gifts and grants and growing it is impressive. And so I would love to give you a chance to perhaps talk about that. The Community Foundation is a financial institution. And so do you have people in-house who manage the funds? How do you go about figuring out these very conservative and prudent but strategically important strategies for growing the money that's going to need to be available for the future?
Well, the most important part of that team is our board's finance committee. We have both board members and non-board members who serve on that committee, and they are just truly dedicated to the long-term health of our community, and they bring a great deal of finance and accounting expertise, but mostly finance expertise to the work. And we're just so fortunate to have them. There's a lot of continuity over time. That makes us really different than a lot of nonprofits that might have their treasurer change every year and their finance committee kind of turn a lot. We have a very steady group. We bring in new members, of course, but it's a very steady group who really understands our role. So I would say the team starts with that committee of our board and of our board. And then we have an incredible chief finance CFO who has been with us for 20 years, and she has done a remarkable job growing us from, a $10 million organization to a $140+ million organization. So my hat is off to those folks. And then we have a investment consultant with Morgan Stanley Greystone, and Brian Sharps and his team has been with us also for quite some time. And so together we make adjustments as needed. Certainly right now, adjustments are required. We're constantly taking a look at what's going on. So that's one part of what we do. We also invest locally. We have a low-interest loan program that donors can contribute to. And while I said that 85,000 number, now I'm regretting it because I want people to know that you can contribute to the Community Foundation at any level. I don't want people to leave with the impression that if you're not rich, we're not for you, because we really help people. For example, our COVID-19 response fund, we've gotten gifts of, $5, and we've gotten much, much, much larger gifts. And we really believe there's a place for everyone to contribute to the needs of this place. But so our low interest loan program is one way that we do that. So we take some of the funds that we have, and we invest it not in Wall Street, but here in Main Street. So we might help a housing development happen. We like to think of ourselves as sort of last resort capital. If a commercial lender, if it's not a good fit for a commercial lender, we want to be there to get a really good project done, and we're willing to take a lower financial return for a really big social return. So that's another way that we invest. And that's really just through looking for projects that we think have that great social return that our community needs and that might not happen without our capital.
That's a beautiful example of leveraging privilege. It has to be noted that the community foundations across the nation really are funded by a lot of money that's been made by a lot of white people often, right? And it's not, and this is an issue in our nation that we're really, I think, beginning to look at. But leveraging privilege toward creating social justice gains is an important role that community foundations can play if they choose. And I have to believe that also has to be a nourishing aspect of your job and of your team.
Oh, it's very nourishing. That's a great word for it. There's no question that our country is in a big examination of income inequality, of wealth inequality and asset inequality, of racial inequality, and looking at the way that philanthropy, has benefited. Philanthropy is really a vehicle in some ways of that, but how can we turn it into the healing power that it should be, the connectivity that it should be? How can we make sure that what it's doing is working to empower people who have been marginalized by that inequality, to empower them to create their own solutions? And, I'm really proud to get to work with leaders who do just that, and we certainly feel strongly about it at the Community Foundation.
And I'm not sure if you finished telling us about all the financial aspects that I asked about, but just, when you were talking about that, it really jumped out to me that what you were describing, to me, it's so important. There's such a need in Santa Cruz, say, for a loan of last resort with a low interest rate. Loans, I understand that, you talked about affordable housing projects. That's so important. And my understanding is you have several of them, like on your site, I saw one for Habitat for Humanity, and then you have another program that loans to school teachers. That's part of a bigger initiative, I think, that started in San Francisco. These are really important things, even if it's not on a massive scale. They're vitally important, and the redistribution of wealth is a very important step that all communities need to make. And so it's nice to know that we do have the Community Foundation who's doing its part to do that. And so with some of the time that we have left, I do want to continue to ask, you were talking to me in our pre-interview about some of the financial instruments that you have. And I remember thinking like, wow, I don't know what she's talking about. But and that's why, well, because what the Community Foundation does is very sophisticated, because really managing money and dealing with taxes and planning for the future and offering loans, and this is it's complicated stuff. It takes a lot of knowledge, but I think it's a great opportunity to learn, about that. And so I'm wondering if there are some other things that you would like to share with myself and our listeners about what you do.
Well, I think the big thing is we make it easy. So we do take very complex tools, charitable giving tools, and we customize them to meet what your need is. So you don't have to learn about a charitable remainder trust if it has nothing to do with you. You don't have to learn about gifts of appreciated securities or real estate if it has nothing to do with you, because that's what we do. We work really closely with estate planning attorneys, and I think one of our greatest tools that we make easy is what we call affectionately our mochi. And that's a mochi is not ice cream. It stands for a Memorandum of Charitable Intent. And it is just a lovely, wonderful, happy tool, and that is part of a process that most people dread and procrastinate over, and really have a lot of anxiety about completing, and that's their will or trust. And so many people go to an attorney, they're working on their trust documents, and there's a question, do you want to give anything to charity when you die? And people just think like, I don't even know how to begin to do that. Will the organization even be around when I die that I care about? Will the issue be important when I die? How do I select the organizations? How much do I do? How would I ever figure this out? How do I know that it's going to be used in the way that I want it? And so for a lot of people, it's just too many unknowns, and they just kind of want to put it away. But what estate planning attorneys will do is say, hey, why don't you go talk to the Community Foundation? All you have to do with me is say the percentage that you want to go to charity in your trust. And I'll write that in, and then you get to meet with the Community Foundation at no charge, change it as often as you want, and they'll help you determine the plan. And again, you can update it, in 2 years if you decide that you're not concerned about, the redwoods anymore, and you're really concerned about reproductive freedom. They'll help you change that. And so that's just a tool that we can do that helps people think a lot. And we, for example, if the person dies and the organization they most loved has gone out of business, then we're able to go to their next choice, or to fulfill their intention of what that organization did that they cared about. And so it really takes the worry and the anxiety out of planning, out of charitable estate planning, and it just lets the donor have the fun part of, gosh, what do I care about? What do I want it to be named? And it doesn't have to even stay at the Community Foundation. We're happy to act as a pass-through, or we just make sure that everything is done as the donor wanted. So that's a really lovely tool, because it comes at a time in most of our lives that we just don't really want to deal with. Most of us don't really like going to the attorney and doing that stuff. And so it becomes a fun part, and we love the attorneys that we work with, and feel really honored that they refer their clients to us.
Well, and what I'm also realizing as you're describing that is, wow, this could make the job of executors a lot easier.
That's for sure.
Right? Yes. Because, like, we've just done our end of life planning very recently, and we, we're chewing on the pencil, like, okay, where do we want this to go? What purpose do we want it to serve? It was difficult. And now I'm like, oh, and I think I've got to go in and change it. And then I have to meet with the attorney and pay the attorney's fees. And what I'm hearing is that if you put your funds in the hands of the community foundation, people get to consult with you as much as they need to.
That's right. So, we had one family come in not long ago, and they said, look, we have 2 children, but we're going to think of the community as our 3rd child. And so we want our trust when we die to be divided 3 ways. And, oldest child, youngest child, community. And we have no idea really what we want for the community part of it. And so we just got to talking about what they cared about. And it was a wonderful conversation between them. And it was a wonderful conversation that they had with their kids and with their kids and with their kids. That was a really lovely way to do it. And so all they have in their trust documents is it just says, and 33% to the community foundation per the most recent instructions given in my memorandum of charitable intent. So that's all that's in the estate plan, in the trust documents, But then with us on file is a much more detailed explanation of what they want to do. And they get to change their mind whenever they want with no bill from the attorney, and the attorney doesn't, the attorney gets to stay focused on what the attorney likes to do. So it's been a really good partnership with attorneys.
Well, golly, I'm sort of seeing that now our best buddy Jeff, who's our executor, could really have a much easier job, because the executor is often the one that has to make those disbursements and figure it all out. And if that organization you donated to no longer exists, they're like, now what do I do? So it's pretty brilliant. It's a brilliant option for people to have.
Well, it was created by a local attorney named Rick Pulse, and he created a Center for Planned Giving here at the foundation, and he had just he was an estate planning attorney, worked with tons of clients who just found this part so difficult, and he thought, how do we make it easier? And so he really invented this tool, and it's been replicated in other places, but it's really due to Rick's understanding of how difficult it can be, but how, if we could take the pain out of it, it could become a really, really fulfilling part of somebody's planning.
This is very exciting to learn about all the instruments and the tools and the services that the Community Foundation gives to the Santa Cruz area. And I want to take a moment to reintroduce our show. If you have just tuned in, this is KSQD Santa Cruz at 90.7 FM, and we are talking with Susan True of the Community Foundation, Santa Cruz County. And we're going to take a moment to acknowledge one of our underwriters, and we will be right back.
KSQD thanks Growing Up in Santa Cruz for supporting this program. Growing Up in Santa Cruz offers monthly news and views for Santa Cruz families and a calendar of local family events. Growing Up in Santa Cruz can be found for free in locations throughout Santa Cruz County. Thank you for supporting Community Radio, KSQD 90.7 FM.
On Talk of the Bay this Thursday, join host Rachel Ann Goodman for a conversation about opening our schools. How can we make the next school year better for our community's children? What is safe and what is needed? We'll hear from Casey Carlson from the American Federation of Teachers and Ferris Saba, Superintendent of Education for Santa Cruz County. They invite your calls and your questions. That's coming up this Thursday at 5 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. And this is Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington, and we are chatting here with Susan True of the Community Foundation, Santa Cruz County, about all the ways that the Community Foundation can be of service to individuals as they want to contribute to this collective pool of good that goes out every year into our community through what you and your team accomplish, Susan. And so with the few minutes that we have left, I'd really like to turn to a very present issue that the Community Foundation has been dealing with, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. I understand that the Community Foundation has set up a fund, and you have also set up something called the Economic Recovery Council. And so with the minutes we have left, I want to talk about both of those things. Where would you like to start?
Well, I guess I would start on, I think it was March 13th, which was the day that the school closures were announced. It was before we went into our official shelter in place, but the superintendents came together and said, we don't think it's safe to continue to have children in schools. And I just remember thinking, there's no way that our community is going to get through this without all of us coming together. We are all going to have to come together. I don't know what's ahead. It's only March 13th, but I know that we're going to have a lot of needs, and we're going to need our neighbors right now. And so we set up the COVID Response Fund, and since March 13th, that fund has already given $2 million, mostly for the direct financial needs of the neighbors in our community. It's been just incredible to see the donations come in. We set it up and sent out a newsletter, and people just started giving. We care so much about our neighbors here. It's my favorite thing about Santa Cruz County. I love, to mountain bike, and I love to run, and I love our beaches and all that great stuff that people enjoy here. But what I really love is the way we step up for each other and come together. And we just have, and we still need gifts to that fund, and because the needs just continue to grow. We've prioritized making sure that people who don't receive other assistance due to immigration status have their basic needs met. We've also focused on the digital divide for children so they can keep learning. We have focused on frail seniors who may be homebound and vulnerable in whole new ways. So it's just been incredible to see the community come together in this way and to work with leaders in the community to make sure that funds are getting right where they need to go. I feel really lucky because I've been a very good shelter in place, but I do go out to sometimes a food distribution or rental assistance and just to understand what the issues are and to make sure that we are fresh and current in our understanding of what our community members are going through and making sure that we're getting funds right where they're needed as quickly as possible.
Well, that is so wonderful to hear that many people have come together and that you were thinking about others right at the beginning. I know when this all started, a lot of us were sort of, actually, that's not true. A lot of people right at the beginning, it's true, were texting back and forth, and they're like, we're going to have to donate to Second Harvest. So people were thinking about that, and as well in my community. So that is really good to hear. And so pivoting to the Economic Recovery Council, this sounds like a very powerful support service that Community Foundation has put together. Can you let our listeners know a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. I mean, going back to those early days of March, I remember being at the Boardwalk parking lot, which is where Second Harvest Food Bank continues to do food distribution. And I remember looking at the line of cars down Beach Street and thinking, wow, we've got to find a way to get people safely back to work. Our community doesn't run without an economy, and our economy is so based on small businesses related to tourism and agriculture. How are we going to make sure that people have a safe way to work? And philanthropy can't do this forever. We're going to need a safe reopening. And so I worked with the county public health officer and some of our key business leaders, really focused on the brick and mortar businesses that for generations have kept us all going. And so reached out to restaurant owners and hoteliers and retail and tourist-oriented and said, look, the governor's planning to open your businesses first. We have an opportunity here to work closely with the county public health team to make sure that the guidance that we give is both feasible but also as safe as possible for employees and for customers. And so we put together this team. We meet weekly. Things have changed dramatically since then. The governor opened things much faster than we ever imagined, and we can see that in our rising case counts. We never thought it would open quite so fast. And so now this group is an incredible source of information for their colleagues. They, the person who represents hotels, the people are able to go back to their hotel networks and give them information about safe reopening, let them know the current health orders, understand the rise. The Santa Cruz County Business Council is putting a town hall together for people under 35, because that's our biggest group of COVID cases. It's called Don't Kill Grandma, and it's really trying to reach a younger audience to say, like, here's what we all have to do to keep each other safe so that businesses can stay open and we don't lose more jobs. So there's a lot of different efforts that it's taken on. It's not a staffed committee. We just get it done. We just have brought together a really wonderful group of business leaders to try to make sure that we can have as many jobs as possible, as safe as possible.
Wow, I'm just amazed at all the hats you and your team wear, because not only are you collecting funds and dispersing funds, but you're really putting together a leadership plan and offering a service to all these different businesses, and that's really a terrific gift.
Well, we get to be that lucky pollinator, right? It's like we see something needs to get done, and we get to bring people together to do it. And we're trying. We have been a little island in Santa Cruz County, surrounded by counties with much higher prevalence of COVID. But we are rising quickly, and we need to make sure that we do 4 things if we have interactions with people who don't live with us. One thing is to make sure that it is a brief interaction. If it's indoors, it must be brief, under 10 minutes. It must be masked, 6 feet apart. And the very, very, very best interaction that you can have with someone you don't live with is to make sure that it's outside. So most of our cases have come from a break room where employees are chatting together over extended periods. It's come from people going to parties together. It's come from family celebrations in one person's house. So we really need to think about taking our interactions with people who live in different households outside and keeping distance. At least try for 3 of those 4. If you're outside, it doesn't have to be so brief. If you're masked, you don't have to, so really try to get to 3 of those 4: brief, distant, masked, and outside. And it's the only way we're going to control this thing. It's the only way we're going to keep more businesses from shutting down, and we're just teetering on the edge of having more shutdowns right now.
Well, thank you. We're going to need to wrap up now, so I thank you for bringing this to a close on the note of keeping our community safe. And I hope the listeners who were listening today, I think they've got a much better feel, I do, about what Community Foundation offers to all of us. And I also just want to take a moment to sort of say, if anyone's listening and you know somebody who might have a great initiative and needs a grant, they should contact you, right? And so where would they find you?
Please go to our website. It's the initials for Community Foundation Santa Cruz County.org. So it's CFSCC.org, Community Foundation Santa Cruz County.org. And we'd love to talk.
Well, perfect. And I also want to remind our listeners that I have a blog page made up about the show. All you have to do is go to the search window where there's a little spyglass and put in Community Foundation. And there's links and information, and to make it much easier to find you, Susan, your team at Community Foundation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christine. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.